few days after the Italian Grand Prix, President Reagan announced that the Global Positioning System, GPS, developed by the US military would be made available for civilian use, not least to prevent tragedies like the shooting down of Korean Airlines Flight 007 a few weeks earlier. In New Jersey, Vanessa Williams was crowned the first African-American Miss America. Williams would go on to a career in music and television, becoming best known for her 1992 hit Save the Best for Last and for regular appearances on Ugly Betty and Desperate Housewives. The Caribbean nation of St Kitts and Nevis became independent from the UK following a referendum, opting to remain within the Commonwealth and retain Queen Elizabeth II as head of state. And on the day of the European Grand Prix, a group of 38 IRA prisoners escaped from the Maze prison in Northern Ireland, the largest prison escape since World War II. Despite the large number of prisoners and their possession of 6 handguns, only one prison officer died, of a heart attack, during the escape. The escape was a propaganda coup for the IRA and a PR disaster for the British government, and many of the prisoners were never recaptured. Meanwhile, in Kent, the Brands Hatch circuit prepared to host its second Formula One race in a year. The title European Grand Prix had been, since 1923, an honorific given to one of the European events every year alongside its national title. The practice had been abandoned after the 1977 British Grand Prix, but now the title was revived for a second UK race, with a lack of convenient microstates like San Marino to pick from. With the Race of Champions in April having been heavily sponsored by Marlboro, Brands Hatch was now plastered in black and gold JPS branding and continuing to make a nonsense of the BBC's ban on tobacco advertising. Williams had hoped to have at least one Honda turbo engine available, but in the end decided to wait until South Africa, but they did enter a third car for their test driver Jonathan Palmer, as a reward for all his hard work in developing the car. Son of a doctor, Jonathan Palmer studied medicine himself and did his first racing while a student at Guy's Hospital Medical School. He achieved his doctorate in 1979 and Dr. Jonathan Palmer took up a position at a hospital in Sussex, but quickly found that he enjoyed racing more than medicine and couldn't do both at the same time. In 1981 he took a sabbatical from the hospital to race in Formula 3. Quick right out of the box, he won 4 races early on in his West Sussex Racing Ralt chassis and did enough to take the title ahead of Thierry Tassin and Raoul Boesel. This landed him a Formula 2 works drive with Ralt Honda and an opportunity to test for Williams. His first year in F2 was difficult, but in 1983 it all came good, and after a slow start he took 5 wins in a row to take the European Formula 2 Championship on the 4th of September. Many teams were running larger rear wings along the Ferrari model in order to maximise downforce on the twisty, hilly circuit, while Arrows had local sponsorship from the McConnell Mason Art Gallery, and Theodore dropped to a single car for Guerrero, leaving Johnny Cicotto on the sidelines and prompting further rumours about Guerrero's future prospects. Despite it being a third Formula One race in Britain, there was a good turnout and they were treated to a fine qualifying battle as drivers went at it hammer and tongs to get good grid positions on the narrow circuit. Andrea de Cesaris binned his Alfa Romeo, De Angelis had a smaller off and there were a number of blown engines. When the dust settled, the Imperial Tobacco executives were delighted to see the JPS-sponsored Lotus cars first and third, with De Angelis taking his career-first pole and Mansell behind Patrese Brabham. Of the 4 title contenders, Piquet was 4th, then the Ferraris of Arnoux and Tambay on row 3, with Cheever and Prost on row 4. Winkelhock continued his search for a point in 9th, Watson put his McLaren tag 10th, followed by the Tollmans. An increasingly dispirited Jacques Lafitte ended at bottom of the timing sheets and failed to qualify, and to add to his woes, first-timer Palmer managed 25th. At the very back was Michele Alboreto, rumoured to already have a Ferrari contract in place and not really trying for Tyrrell anymore, and only a 10th away from being bumped off the grid entirely by Kenny Aitchison. Under glorious blue skies, far from guaranteed in late September in England, the cars lined up for the start and official starter Derek Ongaro hit the button to launch the cars. On the less advantageous side of the grid, De Angelis lost out to Patrese, and nearly lost second to a charging Mansell. The English driver soon had Piquet and Cheever clambering all over the back of him, and the 2 leading Italians were rapidly pulling away. Meanwhile, Jarier had broken his gearbox on the grid and would not be troubling the front runners this week. By the end of lap 1 it was already obvious that Mansell was holding up a chasing pack of Piquet, Cheever, Winkelhock, Arnoux, Prost, Tambay and Warwick. Piquet got past the Lotus on lap 2 and tore off in pursuit of the leaders. He was followed through by Cheever, and Mansell, struggling with a dodgy set of tyres, was soon dropping back through the order, finding himself 7th ahead of Winkelhock. Patrese and De Angelis were still running close together at the front, with championship challenger Piquet giving chase but unable to make much impression on them. And Patrese was in no mood to help his teammate to the title by slowing up and letting him through, given he'd only finished 2 races this season and his seat was rumoured to be in jeopardy. Further back, Cheever had a similar dilemma, but had a rather better record under his belt and didn't make life too difficult for Prost, who came past him to 4th, but nearly 10 seconds behind the leader. Not for long, though, as Prost got his foot down and began reeling in Piquet and the leaders. On lap 11, and off camera, De Angelis tried a gung-ho move on Patrese and tipped them both into spins. Piquet swept through into the lead, while Patrese got going in second, with slightly deranged suspension and Prost right under his gearbox, and De Angelis, who'd spun further onto the grass, dropped right back to 6th and trailed into the pits with a broken oil pump a couple of laps later anyway. Prost got past Patrese too, after a few laps impotently watching Piquet disappear into the distance, and the Renault set about chasing down the Brabham. Further back, Arnoux had a bit of a brain fade and spun at Surtees while chasing Cheever, ending up beached on the curb and 20th by the time he got moving again. So with Piquet out front, chased by Prost, Patrese now led a close train of Cheever, Mansell, Tambay and De Cesaris, holding them up but not slow enough to allow them to get past. Lauda's race was over on lap 26 with his 3rd tag engine failure in 3 races, and a lap later Danny Sullivan's Tyrrell suffered an oil leak which pitched him into a spin followed by a fire. Luckily Sullivan noticed the fire after a couple of corners and pulled off. As half distance and the pit stop window approached, Piquet had a lead of some 10 seconds over Prost, which he was slowly increasing, and Cheever was the first in from 4th, out in 11.5 seconds. The other leaders came in over the following laps, with Patrese in on lap 39, but held up with a misaligned right rear and spending 25 seconds stationary. Prost was in on lap 41 for a slightly sluggish 13.94 seconds, Mansell in a cracking sub 10 seconds, and then last of the front runners Piquet, but the Brabham team's bad luck in the pits continued as a problem with the wheel gun cost him 19 seconds. However, Nelson had a big enough lead to hold on to first, and, once Cheever had made a second unscheduled stop to have his loose helmet visor taped down, it was Piquet leading Prost, with Tambay 3rd, Mansell 4th, a charging De Cesaris 5th and Warwick 6th, and catching the pair in front of him. Mansell seemed to have a better set of tyres on now, and was able to keep De Cesaris behind him and reel in Tambay at the same time. Warwick suffered an unusual accident as his CO2 fire extinguisher went off in the cockpit, misting up his visor and giving him some really nasty cold burns on his leg and right arm, which cost him 9 seconds as he slowed up, but he was able to keep it going. With De Cesaris now dropping back from Mansell, the Briton was catching Tambay and had the gap down to 6 seconds with 20 laps to go. The Ferrari's brakes were fading, and when Mansell finally caught up on lap 66, Patrick didn't put up a fight and Nigel was up into 3rd. 2 laps later, Tambay's brakes failed entirely and put him into the barriers at Druids, out of both the race and the title fight. And that was that for incident, as Piquet calmly reeled off the laps to take his 3rd win of the season, and Prost trailed in a defeated 2nd, the Renault just never getting to grips with the Brands Hatch circuit. Mansell gave the home fans something to cheer with his 3rd career podium visit, with De Cesaris 4th, and the Tolmans both finishing in the points for the first time ever. Patrese and Winkelhock both finished for a change but just outside the points, and Arnoux could only manage 9th. Jonathan Palmer meanwhile brought home the Williams 13th on his Grand Prix debut. So with 1 race to go, it was realistically between Piquet and Prost for the title, though Arnoux still had an outside chance. There were 3 weeks to go for the teams and drivers to prepare for South Africa, and for the fans and pundits to speculate on the title race and on the lineups for 1984.